Good afternoon. I would like to present to you an overview of the proposed fiscal year 22 operating and capital budgets. I am happy to present a more optimistic picture than I did last year. So first, I wanted to provide a quick recap of what was transpiring during last year's budget process and highlight the changes that have occurred since that have significantly boosted the economy and the county's revenue outlook, bringing us to the more optimistic proposed fiscal year 22 budget. During the fiscal year 21 budget process, we were faced with unprecedented fiscal uncertainty as we were entering an historic pandemic. By the end of March, statewide stay-at-home orders were put in place to help prevent the spread of the virus. Economic activity was constrained as lockdowns and business closures were implemented, job losses and layoffs began, and no one had any certainty as to how long closures would last. At that time, we had no idea the swift and substantial boost the CARES Act funds and the two following stimulus packages would have on county revenues. These next slides will highlight the major federal and state stimulus packages that helped turn the negative projection into positive revenue collections. So at the end of March 2020, the CARES Act was signed into law, providing $2.2 trillion in assistance to individuals and families, unemployed workers, small businesses, and state and local governments. The county received $144 million directly. The multi-trillion package was huge. It clearly would mean billions of dollars flowing into our economy at some point. But to emphasize that budget adoption time, most of this money was not yet circulating in the economy. No one had any sense of how the economy would respond to the federal programs in light of the high level of uncertainty that still existed prior to the summer business reopenings and without knowledge of what a fall wave of infections heading into winter would look like. So moving into the summer, we were starting to see some positive effects of the CARES Act funds. But by the end of July, the enhanced federal unemployment benefits were set to expire. President Trump authorized FEMA to tap the nation's disaster relief fund to provide some additional relief for states that opted into the program and agreed to provide additional support. Maryland opted in, and beneficiaries received $400 in enhanced weekly benefits to cover the 6-week period spanning August and early September. Meanwhile, the county was receiving its fiscal year 20 final income tax distribution, and fiscal year 20 was shaping up better than expected. However, fiscal year 21 still appeared uncertain, with unemployment still above 7%. By October, these FEMA program funds were exhausted, but largely because of the federal wage replacements. Through September, the county's November income tax distribution was much better than initially expected. So finally, at the end of December 2020, the second federal stimulus package was signed into law, providing $900 billion in additional assistance to individuals and small businesses and extending the enhanced unemployment benefits. The combination of this new funding, along with a stable November income tax distribution, led to a significant upward revision in January to our revenue forecast for fiscal year 21. The improved revenue outlook, as well as surplus remaining at the close of fiscal year 20, and a positive economic outlook for fiscal year 22 were taken into the Spending Affordability Committee's recommendations for the fiscal year 22 budget. And then to improve the fiscal outlook further, in March of 2021, the American Rescue Plan Act was signed into law, providing $1.9 trillion in assistance. The county's general government is expected to receive approximately $161 million directly. A fiscal year 21 supplemental appropriation of these funds is scheduled on the May 27th agenda. So while the CARES Act funds originally had a quick time frame for expenditure, the American Rescue Plan funds can be expended through December of 2024, and it appears there will be some greater flexibility in their use. And on a much smaller scale, but large under normal circumstances, in February, Governor Hogan signed into law Maryland's Relief Act, pumping its own stimulus funding into the economy. more in a targeted way to help those individuals and businesses in need of extra assistance, and by repealing all state and local income taxes on unemployment benefits for both tax years 20 and 21. According to the Department of Legislative Services, the impact of the tax repeal to the county is an approximate $44 million loss over the 2 years. This next slide shows the county's unemployment claims and unemployment rate from March 2020 to April of 2021. So you can see that at the onset of the pandemic, new unemployment claims in the county soared, topping out at 17,412 for the week ending May 2nd, 2020 alone. Similarly, in May 2020, the unemployment rate soared, hitting 9.6%. These claims had been taxable prior to the Relief Act. The most recent data indicate that the county's initial unemployment claims stood at 1,742, with a county unemployment rate of 6%. What the graph doesn't show, because of many workers choosing to exit the labor force, in total, it is estimated that the county has 53,357 fewer employed residents from this time a year ago, or 12.1% of its current labor force. So while income tax revenue represents the second largest source of the budget, the largest revenue input comes from property taxes. Fortunately, throughout the entirety of the pandemic, the housing market has remained hot, as historically low interest rates and available inventory of homes have led to quick sales and surging home sales prices. However, there are some concerns regarding commercial real estate with the reduced foot traffic in retail centers in lieu of online shopping and the transition of many office workers to telework. So given the huge amounts of fiscal stimulus and the encouraging economic indicators, the budget projects that fiscal year 21 general fund revenues will increase by 0.8% over fiscal year 20 actuals. Our legislative forecast is even a bit more positive. So the current year's budget is adopted, anticipated a $28 million drawdown of surplus to fund expenses. Instead, the budget is now projecting a higher surplus at the end of fiscal year 21 by more than $40 million. That's a positive starting point for discussing the fiscal year 22 budget. The proposed fiscal year 22 government-wide operating budget totals $4.3 billion and represents an increase of $298 million, or 7.5%, over the adjusted 21 budget. Nearly 53% of the increase, or $158 million, is in non-county funds, which primarily reflects a significant infusion of federal aid to the schools. Unlike for schools, the general government's infusion from the American Rescue Plan will be presented as a supplemental appropriation. Okay, moving on. The general fund comprises over half the budget, or 55%, followed by 9 non-county funds, which are funds directly received primarily by the education-related entities, for which the council only approves the spending levels. It does not appropriate these funds. This slide shows the composition of the general fund's budget revenues compared to the legislative branch's revenue projections, reflecting about a $25 million difference, and that's primarily in income taxes. So this slide shows the revenue sources of the general fund budget. As you can see, it's primarily funded by property taxes and income taxes. That's about 80% of the budget. And there's another $85 million that is coming from surplus funds. At least 64% of the surplus funding is being used to pay for non-recurring costs, including $53 million in PAYGO. So some surplus funding, though, does appear to be budgeted to cover ongoing costs, such as salaries. So this slide provides a history of general fund revenues. You can see that since fiscal year 2011, there has been modest and steady growth. For fiscal year 22, we project a 1% revenue increase, while OBF projects about 0.9% growth. In fiscal year 20, you can also begin to see the impact of the county's income tax rate increase. So this slide provides perspective on the consumption of the general fund budget over a period of time. The primary drivers of the fiscal year 22 general fund increases are in personnel expenses, and there'll be a subsequent slide going into more of the details on that, followed by insurance and retirement, and PAYGO, general fund contribution to the capital budget. So now let's look at the fiscal year 22 general fund budget, the largest part of the budget, totaling $2.34 billion, an increase of approximately $125 million or 5.7% over the adjusted fiscal year 21 budget. The pie chart shows how these funds are allocated at the agency level. The largest share in green is for education, followed by general government in white, and then public safety in red. The next two slides show the significant changes in the general fund budget. This first slide shows the significant changes at the agency level, ranked by dollars. The most significant changes are in the school's operating budget and the PAYGO contribution to the capital budget, followed by retirement. The next slide gives you a different perspective on the changes in the expenditures. So this slide shows the increases and decreases in general fund spending, broken out between general government and the component units. As I just mentioned, that shows the increased funding for PAYGO on the far left, and then the full year of the June 30, 21 COLA, a half year of the 2% January 1st, 2022 COLA, and the increase to the county's annual required contribution for retirement. As I mentioned, the proposed budget reflects a $38.6 million increase in personal services, primarily for the COLAs, along with increments and longevities. Turning to employees for fiscal year 22, there are 21 net fewer authorized positions. The decrease for college is due to decreased enrollment, and the decrease for libraries is due primarily to efficiencies achieved from changing to a single service desk. The decreases are partially offset by increases primarily to general government and to public safety agencies. The proposed fiscal year 22 general fund budget is approximately $3.9 million under the spending affordability guideline. Based on the revenue estimates contained in the budget projects $293 million in total surplus at the end of fiscal year 22, including $226 million in the rainy day fund. Okay, turning now to the capital budget. The proposed fiscal year 22 capital budget totals $1 billion. It includes $523 million for consolidated public improvement projects and $502 million for Metropolitan District Fund projects, sewer and water project funds that the council does not appropriate. Now focusing on the consolidated public improvement projects. Fiscal year 22 is the first year of the biennial capital budget cycle. As you can see from the pie chart, in yellow, the school projects receive the majority of the funding, followed by buildings, recreations, and roads projects. And details of all of these projects will be discussed during the hearing on the capital budget, which is on May 17th. This next pie chart shows how the consolidated public improvement projects will be funded. As I mentioned, fiscal year 22 is the first year of the biennial cycle, so the majority of the budget, or 76%, the piece of the pie in green, is funded with general obligation bonds, followed by general fund PAYGO, state funds, and debt premium. This slide does not include state funding that goes directly to the schools for school construction projects, which takes us to the next two slides, which we've highlighted for you, the Built to Learn Act, effective with the passage of the Blueprint for Maryland's Future Act. Baltimore County is eligible to receive up to $462 million in new school construction funding over the next several years, beginning in fiscal year 22. We will talk more about the details of this funding also in the capital budget hearing on the 17th. So the last two slides address the Spending Affordability Committee's debt guidelines. The fiscal year 22 budget is in compliance with the SAC's debt outstanding guideline, which is set at 2.5% of the county's total assessable property value, where the red bar is going across the graph. The ratio is estimated to be 2.2% for fiscal year 22. While total debt outstanding is increasing in fiscal year 22, so is the assessable property value, which helps suppress the debt ratio. And the fiscal year 22 budget is in compliance with the debt service guideline, which is set at 9.5% of general fund revenues. The ratio is estimated to be 8.6% for fiscal year 22, based on our forecasted revenues. For this debt measure, the positive general fund revenue forecast helps suppress the ratio. So what's next? All the various agency budgets, all the details, as well as the capital budget will be discussed at the hearings, which begin May 6th, conclude May 19th. The budget deliberations are scheduled for May 20th, and the budget adoption is scheduled for May 27th. The full budget hearing scheduled is posted on the council's website. And there are various bills related to the budget that will be presented for council approval on the May 27th and June 7th agendas. And that is the overview of the FY22 operating and capital budgets.
Thank you very much, Lauren. Does anybody have any questions?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I have a quick question.
Yes, go right ahead, Councilman Quirk.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Lauren, do you know, with the enterprise funds, 382.8 million, what percentage of that is Metro? Is that the vast majority of it's Metro?
Let me open the schedule, right, because it's, let's see, 332 million of that is the Metro District Fund out of the 382.
Okay.
So yes, the majority.
Okay, then the rest is what is it? School lunch funding? What's the how does the other break down?
Yes, that is for the food and nutrition program, and a small part for the college bookstore.
Right. And then now with the enterprise funds, that has an automatic increase each year for the next several years. Is that right to the taxpayers?
I have to look to see what the rates are going to be. We will definitely have that for the Public Works hearing. I do believe there were some, they had established rate changes. So I have to look at the most recent executive order. Ed, maybe you have that information handy.
There is an increase for FY22 and following with the executive order that was approved 3 years ago.
That's right.
So, and this is the last year the planned increases.
Yeah, I think it was County Executive Bowler, and it was. Is this the last year of that automatic kind of bump up, Ed, or is there several more? I can't remember if there's several more years or when
Yes,
that is.
This is
concluded.
it is the last year.
Okay, this is the last year, and then so citizens won't keep seeing that automatically bump up then. Okay. Yeah, I wouldn't mind like an update later just on how that's gone, you know, based on kind of what we did before and what type of progress are we kind of, in other words, are we hitting our the marks that we were hoping to hit when County Executive Mueller put that in? I mean, just for later, I'm just curious to see how we're doing versus what we were hoping, if we kind of got that funding, in other words, a little more stabilized or not.
Okay.
We'd be happy to provide that to you, Councilman Quirk. We've done a lot of work in that area.
Yeah, no doubt. No doubt, it's a very complex and a lot to clean up there for sure. So I appreciate it, and I know there's still a lot of work to be done. Thank you.
Lauren, Mr.
Yes.
Chair? Yes, go right ahead, Councilman Ken?
Yes, Lauren, in the future, will you be discussing MOE as far as the school system and also reviewing how they're calculating the school population for next year?
Yes, we'll have that for the school's operating budget hearing.
For MOE and school population?
Yes.
Good, thank you.
Mhm.
Lauren, I also had a question. At one point, I'm a little confused on the amount of money or the pot of money we were discussing. You said that we do not appropriate these funds, yet the amount. What monies were you talking about at that time?
That's the non-county funds.
Okay.
So those are funds that go directly mostly to the school system as well as to the college and the library. And you are only authorizing them to spend it. You don't appropriate it as part of the budget.
Okay, that was the, what, 298 million?
Let me go back to the government-wide screen.
Or 158?
That was, oh, the increase, yes, of 158 million, correct.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yes.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, go right ahead, Councilman.
I have a couple of questions for Lauren and clarification. So Lauren, just first, you had indicated there was an increased level of funding in revenues from property tax. And based on elevated activity or higher appraisals. And could you clarify, because I hear this out in the field all the time, people say that the county council increased my property taxes, but that is not a correct statement. And I would just, could you affirm that, how that happens? For
That's
folks that are-
through the State Department of Assessment and Taxation. They actually assess the property taxes. And yes, the county establishes a property tax rate, which is applied to the assessment. And there's also a homestead property tax credit, which limits the amount your tax bill can increase. So,
But it's not the
Just to
county
clarify,
raising the property tax is what I'm saying.
no,
Correct.
no, it's based on your assessment, which is done by the State Department of Assessment and Taxation on a 3-year cycle.
right?
Yes,
for
I fully
FY
understand it. I just wanted you to say it so that anyone that is in the audience or watching online understands that. 'Cause
Right,
I
who to
think
call?
we all of the council members get called on for that. And so thank you for the clarification.
Absolutely. Liz, did you have something?
I just wanted to say, yes, the tax rate is unchanged. Again, it's $1.10 for $100 of assessed value.
And that's
and
another
then-
bill that will be presented for council approval to maintain the property tax rate.
In the American Rescue Plan, you said that we have a little bit more time until December of 2024.
It has
Does
a
that
longer,
imply-
right,
Does that imply that it's all capital funding or it's phased in operating budget funds over the next 2 to 3 years?
well, that'll be contingent on the plan that the county executive presents. I believe they're waiting on some guidance from the U.S. Treasury. With CARES Act, it took a lot of time to get these guidelines in place. There were frequent FAQs always evolving. So, but these funds have a longer period of time that they can be used, and at this rate appear to have some more flexibility that may include infrastructure for certain things.
So the infrastructure would be capital, but I
Yes.
guess the question I'm asking is, do you foresee in that mix of in the American Rescue Plan funds, the ability to apply some of that on the operating side in the next 2 to 3 years?
And that will come with the supplemental appropriation, the plans that will be going with the funds that will be coming from the administration. Ms. Rogers, if you want to say anything further.
The current guidance that we've received, Councilmember Patoka, does indicate we can use it on the operating side. But we're
like-
waiting for the final guidance, which is due to us later this month. And then we can better plan. But it appears based on the guidance that we have, yes, it can be utilized on the operating side of the budget.
Well, that's good to know because I know we plan multi-years on the capital side, but less so on the operating side.
Right.
So it's good to know that we have that in our back pocket, planning not only for fiscal 22, but fiscal 23, and also actually December 24, I think will just be fiscal 23.
Wow.
I think, if I did my fiscal years correctly. Just two more questions and then I'll stop. One, so, and this is kind of, so you said at the end of the fiscal year, we would have $40 million in unspent appropriation or unspent general fund.
That was general funds, surplus,
And
a surplus
it's
balance.
appropriated for specific projects that are not,
So that's just surplus that is available for the FY22 budget. So unspent general funds revert into surplus and then can be used, as we see the FY22 budget is being funded with 85 million in surplus funds.
so it's based on funds that increased our revenue projections rather than funds that were allocated or appropriated for a specific project and unspent, or a mix of that.
Right. I would more a mix because it also includes funds that weren't spent.
Okay, and last question, and I guess that is applied, that $40 million, this is still in the third question, is appropriated towards the fiscal 2022.
In
Fiscal
theory,
year.
yes, because the FY22 budget uses about 85 million of surplus funds. So
Okay,
it's
so
the savings
40
account.
million.
Yep.
And then last question, and then I'll stop, is the $3.8 million below the spending affordability guidelines that you identified. So does council have any ability to influence? So we, as I understand it, we only have the ability to cut funds. We can't move funds around, nor can we add funds. Is there a mechanism for the county council to look at that 3.8 million below the spending affordability guidelines and target project or projects or something to benefit the residents of Baltimore County with those dollars that are below the spending affordability guidelines? Because I understand that if we stay below that, then we won't jeopardize our bond rating. And so I'm worried about the opportunity cost of things we could be doing for the benefit of the public that is $3.8 million above what we're doing.
Well, this is
And
based
we're
on
still below the spending
Right.
affordability guidelines. Is there a
Right.
mechanism for council to influence that?
You can't add to the budget.
right.
So that would be adding to the budget. If they bring forward supplemental
Right,
appropriation.
I understand that.
Right.
So the bottom line is that we take the opportunity for that $3.8 million below the spending affordability guidelines could be used for landfill, could be used for, upgrading our solid waste. We just are choosing not to use that 3.8 million. So there's an opportunity cost, in my opinion.
Well, this is basically the difference between what the Spending Affordability Committee set as its spending guideline and what the county executive's proposed budget came in at.
Right,
So,
I understand that. Then, so the answer, I guess, is there's no mechanism.
right.
So again, I suggest that there's an opportunity cost related to that.
Mr. Chair, if I may.
Go right ahead.
Thank you. Well, Mr. Matoka, you took my one question regarding have we received additional guidance on recovery money, and I appreciate Ms. Rogers letting us know that we have, and more guidance is apparently coming. So, Councilman, I served on the spending affordability committee this past year, and voted with the other members of that committee on the numbers that we suggested to OBF. And in the 2 years that I've served on that committee, it has been what I think is probably a sound strategy that has worked for a while in taking a very conservative approach. And that's one of the reasons that we don't get too aggressive on SAC with recommendations, because we don't want to get into a situation where we're at jeopardy of losing our bond rating. And I think too, the approach is we don't know what the future is. We didn't know that COVID was going to happen. We don't know if there's going to be some sort of unfortunate thing that the county's going to have to deal with. And I think that's why there's surplus, and that's why we as a county we carry a lot of debt, but we're not going into such debt that the credit rating agencies are worried about us, and we've retained that AAA bond rating because of that conservative approach. I think I might sound like Ed Blades right now, I don't know, but I did want to address also the property tax equation. And I think one of the unfortunate things, and I've expressed this to Mr. Bostwick probably every year, at least since I've been in office, is that the state requires the council to make public notice of what the tax rate is going to be. And in that notice, it talks about the additional revenue based on the assessments that the county will be taking in. And Lauren showed the slide with our revenue numbers going up because of assessments going up and the real estate market being pretty hot. But we have to realize that that's half the story, that the assessments are driving this additional revenue, and we're keeping our rate the same because it's an X times Y equals Z equation, and we're the X. So we could always lower the property tax rate if the assessments go up, and we've chosen not to do that, or at least the council, as the majority of the council members have voted not to do that in the past. But I just want us all to realize that we're part of that equation. So we have choices to make if we want to provide a break to our taxpayers. So I think it gets lost in our argument that, well, the state raised assessments and we didn't change our rate. So sorry, you're still paying more taxes. So I wanted to bring that up. And then I think, Lauren, I have one.
Councilman Crandall, just while you're looking for that one, just wanted to clarify that I'm not suggesting that we go above the spending affordability guidelines. But the question was related to the gap between the recommended appropriation and that limit. That's all. I just want to clarify it. Thank you.
Okay, I got you. And Lauren, we can hold off on this until we get to the police coming in for their hearing. But did I see that slide right? That they are there's a funding decrease for police in this year's budget.
That was the final settlement payment. So it was a one-time cost that we just deduct.
All right, so got it. So that's that leads to that dip there. I got it. Okay, thank you.
Sure. Councilman Quirk. Chairman. Councilman Quirk is next.
Yeah,
and then Councilman Marks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I just wanted to follow up on Councilman Crandall's comments as well. And you just remind everybody that the spending affordability guideline, that's a maximum amount we could spend, not a recommended spend level. So there's no opportunity cost, in other words, of like missing something. Matter of fact, I personally appreciate the county executive coming in below that maximum guideline because, as anybody knows with budgets, things can change. And so it's good to have some flexibility in case things maybe turn a different direction. So I actually think it's a great thing that the county exec actually submitted a budget below the maximum guideline threshold. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Sure. Councilman Marks?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. At first, I want to begin by saying I think there's a lot to like in this budget, particularly on the capital side. It seems to me in prosperous times, you fund infrastructure, schools, bricks and mortar projects, and I think the county executive was very wise in doing that. I just had two questions for the auditors. First, it looked like there was a decrease in 911. Am I correct about that?
Yes, it's just movement of some general funds. It's now going to be covered by a grant. So
Okay.
there's no loss in funding. It's just the funding source is now being grant funded.
But it's a grant we'll have to apply for every year, right? If the grant disappears, we're on the hook
Right.
for
You'll
those
be back to
expenses.
the general fund. Right. It's just a different funding approach. If you recall, you'll see reimbursements out of the 911 trust fund for typically like training and software. So now they're budgeting with this grant.
Okay. My understanding is that a lot of the BCPS funding is through stimulus money. Is there any concerns for the long term with this type of approach?
Well, keep in mind that, you know, it is grant money and it is one time. So when the funds end, that's the end of that funding source. So it's important to look at what the funds are being used for.
Okay. But do you have any concerns with that approach? I mean, the stimulus money is going to evaporate at some point, and
Right.
we're going to have to find ways of funding that.
Right. And that's will be the challenge of finding ways to make up for replacing the grant funds that no longer will be there. So.
Yeah, I mean,
Chime in.
Yeah, sure.
One, if you, Ms. Rogers, are you okay with Liz jumping in there? I know you had your hand raised first. It's up to you, Ms. Rogers.
Sure. I'll wait for Liz, but I just wanted to address something about the 911 center and the strategy, which is our general strategy. But I can wait for Liz.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say that I think the county executive spoke to the situation with the education funding, that we will be seeing increases in funding from the state through Kerwin. And then there's also the efficiency study that the administration is working on, which will hopefully lead to some savings within the general fund, and also some possibility of needing some concessions as far as health insurance, ways to save money there within education that will then free up the general fund to absorb some of the costs that are being funded in the non-county funds.
But if I
Hopefully I got
could,
that right.
he also said, as I understand it, I mean, we would look for ways to continue the funding level, but it's not mandatory that we continue the funding level from grants, correct? It's a grant. It's a one-time expended, it's a one-time
Right.
influx. Go ahead, Ms. Rogers.
Well, I'll start with thank you, Mr. Chair and council members. Good afternoon. Our strategy around grant funding is when we can leverage and reserve general funds. We try to do that because there are grant funds out there that we can indeed leverage. Now, of course, things that have, potential to put in, we balance that against being able to reserve county funding for other activities, but knowing down the road, if we weren't able to receive that funding from the grant side, we'd come back and look at that. So it's a strategic leveraging strategy. Spend federal dollars and state dollars, and then reserve county dollars for leveraging opportunities. So that 911 move is just that. As far as the federal funds coming in general, we are looking very closely at how you can fund one-time kind of endeavors, things that will help, but in areas that it will create an out year fiscal obligation. Oh, yes, we're talking strategically with the school system about that. And internally, looking at what we're funding with the federal dollars and being very strategic about it, not to create what you call cliff. So that when the funding ends, then something critical is not, you're not able to fund. You have to plan for how you're going to continue those efforts in the out year. So we've had plenty of discussions about that internally and with the school system.
Yeah, I mean, and look, I want to commend the administration that they're going for grants. This was a frustration I had since when I was elected, that we had opportunities and we never went for those grants. I just want to make sure that over the long term, we're not setting ourselves up to have to find money that's obligated right now in this budget. So thank you.
One more question for me, and at least I think one more. Lauren, I guess I had one quick question about, is it true that I heard we received a windfall because so many people were unemployed and that unemployment was taxable?
I didn't hear the tail end because why?
Is it true that we received somewhat a windfall, even though right now there's 53,000 people unemployed today that were not unemployed last year this time, but we're receiving somewhat of a windfall because the unemployment insurance is taxable?
Liz, you can, we had a large November distribution, which was for a particular reason that we're not expecting, and Liz can go into details as far as how that helped the revenue situation.
I mean, just general, I don't need too specific, just generally, did we receive a windfall because so many people were unemployed and we received the taxes on the unemployment?
Well, that definitely helped. But keep in mind that these were most affected were of lower income. So, but it definitely has helped the revenue situation. The Relief Act will change that.
Okay.
Liz,
Anything to add, Liz?
Anything you want to add, Liz?
No, I mean, really, it's just important to understand that a lot of that was not going to ultimately stay with the county anyway because of refunds that happen. As Lauren said, a lot of the time it's low income individuals that wouldn't be getting taxed at a very high rate anyway. So we might have seen some boost. We're still seeing boosts from all this other federal fiscal stimulus that's floating in the economy. So really that's the more important boost that will continue, at least for a while.
Okay. Anything else? All right, well, thank everyone very much. You okay, Mr. Blade?
I'm good. Thank you, Councilman.
All right. So, all right, I guess we'll adjourn and we'll reconvene at, what is it, 4:30 for the other hearing from the police?
That's correct, Chairman.
All right. Thank everybody very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you all.
All right, thank you, Liz.